All right, so we're diving into some economics today, but don't worry, this won't be a snooze fest, I promise.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Yeah, we're tackling a theory that's been shaping global policy for what, like almost a century? And get this, it all started with one guy and one book.
One guy, one book. Sounds kind of dramatic.
Well, it kind of was, actually. John Maynard Keynes and his book, what's it called again? The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money.
Ah, yes. The General Theory. A classic.
Yeah.
Published in 1936, right? Right in the thick of the Great Depression.
Exactly. The world was in a really bad spot and people were desperate for answers, And this book, well, it really shook things up, like really shook them.
It was a game changer for sure. Challenged a lot of the assumptions that pretty much everyone had about how economies worked.
So, what were those assumptions? What were people thinking back then?
Well, the dominant school of thought at the time was what we now call classical economics. They believed in a pretty hands-off approach, like let the market do its thing.
So, kind of like no need for the government to get involved.
Basically, yeah. The classical economists argued that the economy would naturally self-correct. Any unemployment was seen as more or less voluntary.
Hold on, voluntary. So, people were choosing to be out of work, even during the Great Depression.
That was the prevailing view, believe it or not. They believed that wages would adjust and everyone who wanted a job would eventually find one. But Keynes, well, he wasn't buying it.
I can see why. Millions of people out of work, and you're telling me they're just choosing to chill. No way.
Exactly. Keynes saw firsthand the suffering of people who desperately wanted work but couldn't find it. He called it involuntary unemployment, a direct challenge to the classical view.
So like a big slap in the face to the whole hands-off approach.
You could say that. He argued that the government had a crucial role to play, especially during economic downturns. Instead of waiting for things to sort themselves out, he believed in active intervention to stimulate demand.
Stimulate demand. Is that where the whole, spend our way out of recession idea comes from?
You got it. Keynes argued that aggregate demand, which is just a fancy way of saying total spending in an economy, was the driving force behind employment and economic activity.
Okay, so how does that actually work?
Imagine a town. Everyone suddenly gets nervous about the economy and decides to save more and spend less. What happens?
I guess businesses would suffer because people aren't buying their stuff.
Right. And then what?
Well, I guess they'd have to lay off workers, which would mean those people would have even less money to spend.
Exactly. It becomes a vicious cycle, a downward spiral.
So where does the government come in?
Well, Keynes argued that the government could step in and break that cycle by, wait for it, increasing spending, even if it meant running a deficit. Think of it like this. If no one else is spending, the government can pick up the slack.
So, if everyone's tightening their belts, the government, loosens theirs a bit?
In a way, yes. The idea is to inject money back into the economy, get things moving again.
That makes sense. But, wouldn't that lead to inflation? And wouldn't the government rack up a ton of debt?
Those are definitely valid concerns, and we'll get into those a bit later. But the key idea here is what's called the multiplier effect.
Okay, the multiplier effect, huh? That's interesting.
Basically, government spending doesn't just disappear. It ripples through the economy. Let's say the government builds a new bridge.
Okay, picture a new bridge. Got it.
That creates jobs for construction workers.
Right. Jobs are good.
And then those workers take their wages and spend them at local businesses, which boosts those businesses' income and so on and so on. So $1 of government spending can actually generate a lot more economic activity.
So it's like a domino effect, but instead of dominoes falling, it's like dollars circulating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the power of the multiplier effect. But we've talked about spending. What about investment?
Investment. Yeah, isn't that super important for economic growth?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Keynes agreed. But he also recognized that it's not just about having money available to invest. Businesses need to be confident that those investments will actually pay off.
Yeah, that makes sense. Why invest in new equipment or expand your business if you don't think you'll make a profit?
Precisely. And this is where Keynes introduced a concept called the marginal efficiency of capital.
Okay, marginal efficiency of capital. That sounds kind of intimidating. Can you break it down for me and for our listeners?
Sure. Think of it like this. Imagine a local bakery is thinking about buying a new oven, a bigger, fancier oven.
Okay, new oven. I'm following.
The question is, will the increased production from that oven justify the cost of buying and maintaining it?
So will they be able to bake enough extra bread to make it worth the expense?
Exactly. Will it generate enough extra bread sales to outweigh the cost? That's the marginal efficiency of capital.
So it's like a calculation of whether the potential return justifies the investment. Makes sense.
But here's the thing, how do you measure that, especially when the economy is shaky?
Yeah, that's a good point. If things are uncertain, it's hard to know if your investment will actually pay off.
And that's what Keynes was getting at. He realized that psychological factors, like business confidence, play a huge role in investment decisions. Even if interest rates are low, if businesses are pessimistic about the future, they're less likely to invest.
So it's like, even if that bakery could get a great loan for a new oven, they might hesitate if they think people might suddenly stop buying bread altogether.
Exactly. They're holding back because of uncertainty. And this brings us to another really interesting aspect of Keynesian economics. The relationship between interest rates and something called liquidity preference.
Liquidity preference. Now that sounds like super complicated.
It's not as bad as it sounds. Liquidity preference is just people's desire to hold cash.
Okay, hold cash. I can understand that.
Think about it. When times are uncertain, people feel safer having cash on hand. It gives them flexibility and a sense of security.
So like if you're worried about losing your job or, the economy crashing, you'd want to have some cash tucked away just in case.
Exactly. People cling to their cash when they're worried about what's coming next. But here's how it affects the overall economy. If everyone's holding on to cash, it drives up the demand for liquidity.
Okay, higher demand for liquidity. What does that mean for like interest rates?
Well, think about it. If everyone wants to hold cash, lenders can charge a premium for parting with their money.
So the more people hoard cash, the higher interest rates go.
Got it. But how does that play into investment decisions? Like, how does that affect our bakery owner?
Remember, our bakery owner wants to buy that new oven, right? Even if they decide to take the plunge, those higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive.
So it discourages investment,
Yeah.
even if they're optimistic about their business.
Precisely. So we have this complex interplay between spending, investment, interest rates, and people's feelings about the economy. It's fascinating stuff, really.
It is. And Keynes was really onto something with all of this, wasn't he? Like, his ideas have had a huge impact, haven't they? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten to the most controversial part yet.
Yeah.
His actual solutions for dealing with recessions. That's where things get really interesting, I think.
All right, listener, you heard it here first. We're diving into the deep end of Keynesian solutions next time. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Keynesian economics. Last time, we got a taste of some of those core ideas, like, how government spending can actually help the economy.
Right, challenging those classical assumptions about how economies work.
Yeah, exactly. And especially the whole idea of, like, stimulating demand during those tough times, those recessions. But now it's time to tackle the big question. What did Keynes actually propose? Like, how do you actually fix a struggling economy?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Remember, he was writing during the Great Depression, a time when those traditional economic theories just weren't cutting it. And he basically argued that, well, in times of crisis, the government can't just sit back and wait for things to, magically fix themselves. Right, right. So we talked about stimulating demand. But what does that actually look like? Like, what were some of his actual solutions?
One of his big ideas was government spending on those public works projects.
Public works projects. Okay, so like what?
Think infrastructure.
Right.
Like building roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, maybe even parks.
So basically creating jobs and, putting money directly into the economy.
Exactly. It's about getting people back to work, giving them paychecks that they can then use to buy stuff, which then creates more demand and so on. Plus, you end up with better infrastructure, which, can have some pretty long-term economic benefits.
Yeah, that makes sense. But, like, didn't he say that the government should spend money even if it meant running a deficit?
He did. That was one of his most controversial ideas. Back then, the prevailing wisdom was all about balancing the budget no matter what.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were worried about, like, the government racking up a ton of debt?
Yeah, I can see that. That's never a good thing.
Right. And that debate's still going on today, isn't it? Some economists argue that too much government spending can lead to inflation, right?
Mm.
And that it creates a burden on future generations.
Yeah, I've heard those arguments too. But didn't Keynes have, like, a counter argument? Like, a reason why he thought deficit spending was, worth the risk.
Oh, he absolutely did. He argued that the dangers of, well, the dangers of doing nothing during a really bad recession were far greater than the risks of deficit spending.
Okay, okay, I'm listening.
He believed that prolonged unemployment wasn't just some abstract statistic. It caused immense human suffering. People's lives were being ruined.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to forget about the human cost when you're just talking about numbers and, you know, economic theories.
Right. And Keynes saw that firsthand. He argued that prolonged unemployment could actually make it even harder for the economy to recover in the long run. Well, if people are out of work for too long, their skills can deteriorate, right?
Yeah.
They lose their connection to the workforce. And that makes it even harder for them to find jobs when the economy eventually picks up again.
So it's like a vicious cycle all over again.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
for Keynes, it was a trade-off.
Yeah.
You're weighing the potential downsides of government debt against the very real human costs of a prolonged economic slump. And he believed that bold action was necessary to break that cycle of decline.
So kind of like a calculated risk.
You could say that. He famously said, and I'm paraphrasing here, the boom, not the slump, is the time for austerity.
Okay, the boom, not the slump. What does that even mean?
Basically, he was saying that when the economy is strong, that's the time to, tighten the belt, maybe pay down some of that debt. But during a recession, the priority should be getting people back to work, stimulating that demand we were talking about.
Gotcha. So that's government spending. What else did he have in mind?
Another big one was manipulating interest rates. Remember how we talked about how higher interest rates can actually discourage borrowing and investment?
Yeah, because it makes it more expensive to like take out loans and stuff.
Right. Well, Keynes argued that lowering interest rates could actually have the opposite effect, make it cheaper to borrow money.
So if businesses can borrow money more easily, they're more likely to invest, expand, create jobs.
Exactly. He saw interest rates as a really powerful tool for managing the economy, especially during a downturn. It's like using interest rates as this lever that you can pull to influence economic activity.
That's pretty cool. Like it's amazing how one economist could have, come up with all these ideas that have had such a lasting impact on how we think about the economy even today.
Right. And remember, these ideas they were considered radical at the time. They really challenged the way people thought about the role of government in the economy.
And they sparked a lot of debate, didn't they? I bet not everyone was on board with his ideas.
Oh, definitely not. And that debate's still going strong today. But even with all the controversy, governments around the world still use these Keynesian tools to try and, manage their economies, especially when times get tough.
Yeah. It's like every time there's a recession, you hear about stimulus packages and interest rate cuts. It's it's like Keynesian economics is still in the playbook.
It is.
Oh.
But as with any economic theory, there are always criticisms, always concerns.
So, what are some of the downsides? What are the things that people worry about when it comes to Keynesian policies?
Well, one big concern is government overreach. Some people worry that too much government intervention can actually end up stifling innovation and create this culture of dependency.
Okay, so if businesses and individuals always expect the government to come in and bail them out, they might be less likely to take risks or, be responsible with their own finances.
Right. And there's also the worry that prolonged deficit spending, which remember is a key part of Keynesian solutions, can lead to these really unsustainable levels of government debt.
And that debt eventually has to be paid off by future generations, right?
Exactly. It's kind of like putting a huge bill on a credit card that your kids and grandkids will eventually have to pay off.
So it sounds like there's no easy answer here. There are definitely potential benefits to these Keynesian policies, but there are also, some real risks that need to be considered.
You've got it. There's no magic bullet in economics.
Yeah.
Every solution comes with its own set of trade-offs and potential consequences.
Wow, we've really covered a lot in this deep dive into Keynesian economics. Everything from those classical assumptions to, how spending and even interest rates can be these tools to manage an economy.
Yeah. And of course, those solutions that always seem to spark debate, like government spending during recessions.
Right. It's so interesting how these ideas that, came about during the Great Depression are still so relevant today, almost 100 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it seems like every time there's a major economic crisis, those Keynesian theories, they just pop right back up.
Totally. Like, think about the 2008 financial crisis. Governments all over the world, I mean, they were turning to those stimulus packages and cutting interest rates, like right out of Keynes' playbook.
It's true. And while there were definitely some debates about, about the specifics, about which measures were the right ones to take, a lot of economists would probably agree that those actions, well, they help prevent things from getting a lot worse.
Right, right. So, I mean, even though Keynesian economics has its fair share of critics, it really seems like his ideas have, like, I don't know, they've stood the test of time.
They have, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are some valid concerns about those Keynesian policies.
Yeah, like what are some of the downsides that people point to?
One of the big ones is this idea of government overreach. Like some people worry that if the government intervenes too much, it can actually like stifle innovation,
Hmm.
and create this culture where everyone's just kind of dependent on the government.
So, like, if businesses and people just always expect the government to come in and like bail them out, they might be like less likely to take risks or be responsible with their own money.
Exactly. And then there's also the concern about deficit spending, right? Which, remember, is a key part
Hmm.
of a lot of those Keynesian solutions. But some people worry that, that prolonged deficit spending can lead to these crazy high levels of government debt.
And that debt has to be paid off eventually, right? Like by future generations.
Yeah, exactly. It's like racking up a huge credit card bill that your kids and grandkids are going to have to pay off someday.
So it sounds like there's no easy answer here, really. Like there are definitely potential benefits to these Keynesian policies, but there are also, some serious risks that have to be, really carefully considered.
Yeah, there are always trade-offs. No magic bullet in economics.
Yeah.
Every solution comes with its own set of consequences, both good and bad.
That's a really good point. So where do we go from here? Like is Keynesian economics still relevant today, like in the 21st century?
I think it definitely is. But like any economic theory, it has to be like
Yeah.
applied carefully and with a good understanding of those potential consequences.
So it's not like this one size fits all solution, but it's one tool that policymakers can use to try and address those economic challenges.
Exactly. It's one tool in the toolbox.
I like that. One tool in the toolbox. So for our listeners out there, like what's the big takeaway here?
I think the big takeaway is that understanding these Keynesian ideas, it's actually really important if you want to make sense of what's happening in the economy, if you want to make sense of what governments are doing, those policies that actually shape our lives.
It's like having this decoder ring to understand, like the news headlines and all the arguments about government spending and interest rates and, stimulus packages and all of that.
Exactly. It helps you make sense of it all.
Well said. Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. I mean, I've learned a lot just talking to you about this, so thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. I hope our listeners got something out of it too.
Yeah. And listener, we encourage you to keep learning, to keep engaging with these ideas because I mean, in the end, I think a well-informed public is essential for a healthy economy, a healthy democracy, a healthy, well, everything.
I couldn't agree more.
Right. So keep those brains buzzing and thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.